There's concern amongst the civil rights community that any new counterterrorism authorities or resources could be used against vulnerable groups when defining violent white supremacy as international terrorism. We saw evidence of this in the aftermath of 9/11 when there was an overreach by U.S. counterterrorism and law enforcement agencies against Arab Americans, American Muslims, and South Asian Americans. Ms. Mulligan, are civil rights leaders and communities of color right to be concerned about providing additional authorities to U.S. national security agencies?
They are right to be concerned, and I think those sorry to repeat myself. They are right to be concerned. And I think that we can and should listen to those communities in developing the solutions to the problem that we're seeing today, not only because those communities disproportionately suffer from violence at the hands of white supremacists, but also because, as you've mentioned, they have lived experiences with government counterterrorism efforts and have perspectives on what has and has not worked. One of the reasons that in my testimony today I don't call for an expansion of authorities is for the reasons that you suggest. But the other reason is because there's quite a lot that we can do within the existing national security framework and set of authorities to improve our response to this problem. And we can do that in ways that don't involve increasing surveillance, adding to watch lists, or leveraging intelligence and information against Americans.
And that does not violate civil rights and civil liberties?
Absolutely.
Okay. In August, we learned from a leaked 2018 FBI document that the FBI considered BIEs, Black identity extremists, to be as high a priority as white supremacy extremists. This, despite the fact that white supremacy extremists were responsible for 39 murders in 2018, while BIEs, Black identity extremists, were responsible for approximately 0 that same year. Dr. Geltzer, do you agree with that FBI assessment?
I want FBI assessments to reflect reality and to reflect threats, and I don't know what drove that one, but I do think there's a reason that having aggregate numbers like that shared with, for example, Congress is important, because it allows Congress in its important oversight function to look at whether the work that the Bureau is doing actually reflects deaths that are being caused, attacks that are succeeding, or even attacks that are being attempted. That strikes me as not intruding on the prerogative of law enforcement to, in any particular investigation, do their job, but it does allow folks who sit in this body to check in the aggregate whether resources are being appropriately allocated. And it seems, in fact, that those numbers have caused questions to be asked, like the one you're asking today. So that strikes me as important in facilitating oversight that law enforcement at that level needs.
And so further expounding upon that, Ms. Mulligan, given that the FBI's priorities, and again, because of that aggregate data, are proven to be sort of seriously askew in alignment with what the actual threat is, what should Congress do to ensure that other counterterrorism agencies do not similarly and unjustly target minority communities?
Well, I think first and foremost, the strategies that are being developed, like the one that we're told is coming out today from the Department of Homeland Security, needs to identify violent white supremacy as the current serious domestic threat that it is. Part of what I think that Congress should also do is call on the Director of National Intelligence to increase the priority of violent white supremacists as a threat in the National Intelligence Priorities Framework. I think in the end, what we're going to have to do is get better data to better document what is happening, to stop undercounting the extent to which these crimes are being committed. And to do that, I think the FBI is going to have to get better than it currently is at enforcing its own regulations about how these things are counted.
Right, very good. And then, for those that, for protesters, so for example, after the J20 protests during Trump's inauguration, more than 200 people were arrested, even though the vast majority of those charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. The civil rights community is also concerned about other progressive groups being the target of law enforcement overreach. So, Dr. Geltzer, what protections can we put in place to make sure that efforts to counter white supremacist terrorists are directed at the right groups and are not unjustly expanded?
It's a critical question you ask, and it applies regardless of what authorities, of course, law enforcement might be invoking, whether it's existing terrorism laws, new terrorism laws, hate crime statute, whatever the statute. I don't want to see, and I don't think colleagues I used to work with at the Justice Department want to see that abused or exploited to intrude on political advocacy that's protected. I think that's where you have internal checks within these entities, not only guidelines in place like the DIOG that guides the FBI's work, but you have internal actors like inspectors general. You then have the role of Congress, again, at the aggregate level, not in particular investigations, but at the aggregate level, providing a check. And there might be a role for entities like the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, an independent agency within the executive branch, to look at use of counterterrorism authorities to provide additional check and oversight.
The gentlelady's
Thank
time has
you.
expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.